I'm Nidhi Hegde, Executive Director at the American Economic Liberties Project. Thank you for joining us today for this important moment in the fight against corporate power. At Economic Liberties, we've been building a legal and policy case for breaking up monopolies and oligopolies alongside the farmers, small business owners, and workers who suffer from their harms every single day. And this is why we're here today with our allies. For decades, Washington looked away while a handful of giant meatpackers, the so-called Big Four of JBS, Tyson Foods, National Beef, and Cargill, swallowed the beef processing industry whole, while also amassing dominant shares of the pork and poultry market. Antitrust enforcement went quiet, mergers sailed through. The Big Four have also been repeatedly accused for years for engaging in price fixing and collusion. The consequences fell hardest on America's farmers and ranchers. Today, the people who actually produce the food we eat are getting a smaller share of the money we spend on it. For beef, that share has declined from 70 cents of each dollar in 1970 to as little as 30 cents in recent years. This has pushed hundreds of thousands of ranches and feedlots out of business. And this is a crisis that is getting worse in real time. Just last December, Tyson Foods closed its plant in Lexington, Nebraska. This single decision carried severe consequences. Ranchers across the country will be forced to accept lower prices with fewer buyers competing for cattle. And over 200 workers lost their jobs, devastating a community of just 11,000. This is an outrageous story, but not an isolated one. Greed is the business model of the big meat packers. American families are also dealing with the consequences of this monopolized market every time they go to the grocery store. Beef prices in particular are outpacing inflation significantly, rising over 15% since last year, and the companies at the top have posted record profits. The Trump administration has not been willing to confront the root of the problem. Instead, its response has been to pump in foreign beef exports from Brazil and Argentina. And these imports will not lower costs, since they reach the market largely through the same meatpacking oligopoly that controls prices, but will hurt American ranchers. At Economic Liberties, we know you cannot address a problem rooted in corporate power by tinkering around the edges. You have to be willing to attack it structurally. You have to be willing to take on the biggest names in the industry. You have to break them up. Today, Senate Democrats have introduced a bill that does just that. The Family Grocery and Farmer Relief Act, if passed, will release this critical industry from the grip of modern robber barons. It will restore freedom of enterprise, revitalize local food systems, and help make food prices affordable for American families once again. And make no mistake, breaking the power of these giant corporations is very popular. It's one of the rare issues that genuinely crosses partisan lines, because these meatpacking giants don't ask you for your party affiliation before they exploit you. This bill from Leader Schumer and the many co-sponsors represents one of the most serious proposals in Congress to address both food affordability and the health of the food supply chain. We call on Congress to join them and get the Family Grocery and Farmer Relief Act passed to bring relief to the producers of our food and the increasing number of Americans struggling to get by. Thank you to our fellow allies here for their leadership. You're going to hear from them later. And I do want to acknowledge that this day belongs just as much to the farmers and ranchers who aren't in this room, who fought for this between chores, between deliveries, between everything else it takes to feed this country. They're the true patriots. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Leader Schumer, who has spearheaded this effort to combat anti-competitive abuses in the meatpacking industry to lower costs for Americans. Senator.
Well, thank you, Nidhi, for that nice introduction, and I want to thank, you'll hear shortly from my colleagues, Senator Welch, who I see is here already, right after me, Senator Booker and Senator Gallego, and of course I thank the National Press Club for having us as well, and a special thank you to the American Economic Liberties Project, the host of this breakfast this morning. And finally, to all of today's participants, many who traveled far to join us, welcome. Now let me start with this. On Tuesday night, Americans once again stormed to the polls in another high turnout election. The message from the public was unmistakable. People are fed up with the direction of this country, fed up with the chaos, But most of all, they are fed up with the sky-high costs that have plagued Americans for far too long. While Donald Trump brags about which tariffs he'll slap on countries today, tomorrow, or next week, while he threatens to send our troops to Iran, people across America are scratching their heads and wondering who's looking out for us. Chaos dominates our cable news headlines, but anxiety and worry dominate our kitchen tables. Families agonize amongst themselves about which bills they can pay this month. And today, things have gotten so bad that a trip to the grocery store can bring worry and strife to a whole lot of families. Donald Trump claimed at his State of the Union that grocery prices have come down. That's a lie, plain and simple. He's very good at lying. In the last year alone, the price of beef, as Nidhi mentioned, is up 16% to over $6 a pound. Orange juice is up 30%, lettuce is up 7.3%, rice is up 5%, and something as commonplace as coffee is up 33%. Friends, this is not sustainable. If you can't afford to pay for food, then there's no way you'll be able to keep up with rent, or energy bills, or daycare. You're trapped. That's how Americans feel, trapped. And they're trapped because Donald Trump promised to bring food costs down, and instead, they've gone up. And instead of taking people's worries seriously, Donald Trump and his administration are in a bubble. His Secretary of Agriculture says people should just spend less on groceries. It's amazing what she said. It can cost around $3 a meal for a piece of chicken, a piece of broccoli, a corn tortilla, and one other thing. Amazing, she would say that. She's not serious. They're not serious. Well, Senate Democrats have a message for the country. We hear you. We hear you. Every day, every month, every week, Democrats will put costs front and center in our agenda, and that's what we've been doing. We will do what Donald Trump refuses, present a real, comprehensive plan for how a Democratic majority will lower the cost of living for the American people. We'll go issue by issue, spending weeks at a time, deliberately, in depth, rolling out a battle plan for each front on the war of high costs. 2 months ago, we released our plan to tackle the housing crisis. Soon, we will turn to energy costs, childcare, and health care. And today, we're here to talk about how we'll lower food costs for families. Of course, there are many reasons why food costs have risen. There's Trump's tariffs, there's the disruption in our supply chains, there's the acceleration of climate change, which Trump and Republicans have made worse by eliminating clean energy investments. At fault also is illness in our livestock. But there's also a deeper, more structural problem at play. Today, a handful of powerful corporations have turned food and farming into a rigged game. 40 years ago, the 4 top meatpackers controlled no more than 36% of the beef market. Today, the Big 4 control not only 85% of the beef market, but 67% of the pork market and 60% of the poultry market. One mega conglomerate can now dominate beef, pork, and chicken all at once. And it's not just meat. 4 firms control more than half of all flour milling in America. 2 companies control half the carrot supply. And it's not just food, it's the inputs that our farmers need to produce the food. A generation ago, dozens of firms competed to sell fertilizer. Today, just 3 companies dominate the market. When so much market power is concentrated within so few corporations, Americans at the grocery store see prices go up. And while farmers across the country see their profits go down, and corporate players have a free rein to rig the system. Last year, JBS, one of the biggest meat processing companies on earth, was forced to pay $84 million in fines for inflating meat prices while conspiring to limit supply. Last year, Tyson Foods and Cargill agreed to pay $88 million to settle price-fixing lawsuits. It's good that these schemes were caught, but this won't stop on its own. We know that. So as long as these companies hold monopolistic power, these price gouging schemes will happen again and again and again. A month ago, Tyson Foods announced they're going to shut down one of the major meat processing plants in Nebraska. This one plant accounts for 5% of all of America's meat processing capacity. Shutting it down means fewer choices for cattle ranchers. It means ranchers make less from their livestock. It means the loss of thousands of jobs and the devastation of a rural town, a story we hear far too often across rural America. And it means higher price at the grocery store, as this shutdown creates more bottlenecks in our supply chains. And do our farmers and ranchers see any of the profits when the prices go down? When the prices go up? Of course they don't. Of course they don't. When bacon is sold for $6.99 at the supermarket, just $1.07 goes back to the farmer. For every dollar of beef sold in a supermarket, only 30 cents makes it to the cattle rancher. The CEO of Tyson's, meanwhile, got a 51% pay bump in 2024, earning a cushy $34 million. That's why farmers come to Congress year after year asking for help. This is why over the last 4 decades, 500,000 farms have been wiped off the map. And now, to be very clear, this is a problem that both parties have ignored. The markets have been consolidating since the 1980s. Democrats should not shy away from the truth. But make no mistake, under Donald Trump, the cost of groceries, the ability of people to pay for them, has gone from bad to worse. Donald Trump and Republicans cut hundreds of billions from SNAP benefits, making it harder for millions to put food on the table. The administration turned a blind eye to corporate corruption. They've stalled high-profile investigations. Under Andrew Ferguson, the FTC has gone from standing up to monopolies to rubber stamping mergers. And then, of course, we have Trump's tariffs. They've been a disaster for food costs. Coffee's more expensive, seafood's more expensive, spices and seasonings are more expensive, even chocolate and candy are more expensive. And nobody has suffered more than our farmers. Tariffs on tractors went from 0% to 16%. Tariffs on fertilizers went from 0% to 10%. Tariffs on pesticides went from 6% to a crushing 24%. These tariffs eat away at farmers' dwindling bottom lines. And the weaker they become, the less able they will be able to afford their inputs, and the more susceptible they are to being bought out by the big shots, by the big players. And thus, more consolidation will happen in the market with all its bad effects. The American people have had enough. Our farmers want relief from monopoly power. Our families want relief at the grocery store. So today, as part of Democrats' lower cost agenda, I'm proud to introduce with my colleagues the Family Grocery and Farmer Relief Act, a pro-consumer, pro-competition, pro-worker, and pro-farmer bill. We now have 12 Senate Democrats on this bill and counting. I think I'll name them. I have them here. Aside from Peter Welch, who's here, we have Senator Booker, our ranking member on agriculture, Senator Warren, our ranking member on banking, Senator Sanders, Senator Gallego, Senator Merkley, Senator Schatz, Senator Durbin, who's head of Judiciary, ranking member on Judiciary, Senator Markey, Senator Kim, and Senator Merkley. I want to thank them. Our bill rests on a simple idea. To lower costs, we need more competition. And to create more competition, we have to break the stranglehold of these monopolistic corporations. Our bill will do this by first breaking up dominant meatpackers by forcing the biggest players to choose a line of business instead of sprawling empires across beef, pork, and poultry. Second, breaking up the monopolistic beef marketplace. Third, taking on foreign-controlled conglomerates that squeeze American producers and distort U.S. markets. Fourth, using the full power of government to investigate, expose, and act against grocery price gouging. And finally, making divestitures pro-farmer and pro-worker, empowering rural communities. It's not right for a single company to have the power to dominate beef, pork, chicken all at once. So we will empower the FTC to break them up. We will empower the FTC to similarly look at the beef industry, which is especially concentrated. And we will empower the FTC to push these large corporations to divest as needed. As we do these things, our bill puts small and medium-sized ranchers first. We will prioritize small and mid-sized producers, including farmer co-ops, including independent processors, including worker-owned and community-based plants that will support jobs in rural communities. And we certainly do, and we can certainly do it again. This is in a certain sense history repeating itself, at least we hope. Over 120 years, 120 years ago, Upton Sinclair famously published a novel we all know, The Jungle. We know the story. It instantly reached fame for its depiction of unsafe working conditions in the meatpacking industry. But less remembered was Sinclair's focus on the massive consolidation of that industry, where just like today, a few powerful firms dominated pricing and supply. Sinclair's book opened up America's eyes to the awful power of monopoly and the suffering it caused to workers. It outraged the public and helped motivate Congress to create the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, in 1914. And as fate would have it, their first major investigation was into meatpacking. That was their first one, in which they found that 5 companies alone, these are their words back in 1914, 5 companies alone, quote, attained such a dominant position that they control at will the market in which they buy their supplies, the market in which they sell their products, and hold the fortunes of their competitors in their hands. And a few years later, Congress responded to these findings by passing the Packers and Stockyards Act, which curbed the power of the meatpacking giants and gave the federal government the tools to restore competition and protect producers. 120 years after Upton Sinclair published The Jungle, the American food industry faces the same kind of Goliaths that back then controlled our food supply and raised our prices. It is time for Congress to do what progressive of eras past did so well. Take action to break the monopoly powers, bring the costs down through true competition. My bill will do exactly that. As part of our democratic agenda, we get the majority, we're going to get this done. At the end of the day, this is what it's all about. Making groceries more affordable, making farmers more profitable, and putting the needs of working, middle-class people ahead of the interests of powerful corporations. So I thank you to my colleagues who have joined me in this quest, in this effort, in this, it's a crusade. I'm excited to lower costs here in food and across the board. I'm excited to get to work with everybody on this bill, so many advocates here who we've worked with. And we have a lot of work in front of us as we continue to roll out the Democrats' year-long lower cost agenda. Let's roll up our sleeves, let's get to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schumer, for your leadership
Bye,
and
everybody.
for taking on this
I
righteous
gotta
fight.
open up the floor.
I'd like to welcome Senator Welch from the great state of Vermont.
Thank you very much. The United States government has abandoned rural America. That is what has happened in the last several decades. Rural America is about agriculture, it's about communities, it's about interconnection, it's about mutual support. That can't happen when the work of our agricultural community and the profits that they create are vacuumed up by a few small firms, our farmers are creating an immense amount of wealth, but they're not getting a reasonable share. And when they don't get a reasonable share, the communities in which they live don't get the reasonable share to sustain themselves. And the history of the consolidation is back upon us. The Upton St. Clair reference was exactly right. There was immense consolidation, and the more the profits went to the very few firms, the more the suffering went to the many, the farmers in the communities that were doing all of the work. Recently, I was out in Nebraska and Iowa, and farmers, no one works harder. They don't work harder than farmers, and they have to deal with all the vagaries of weather, the things that they can't control. But what they can't have any control over and inflicts the most harm on them is they have nothing to say about how much they have to pay for their inputs. And then they have nothing to say about the price they are paid for their product. And the reason they don't is because the meat packers in this case, to use that example, are so small and so few and so omnipotent that they can set the price they'll pay. There's no alternative. There is no competition. And that consolidation does what consolidation always does. It concentrates profits in the hands of those who consolidate. That's exactly what consolidation is about. So what should government be about? Government should be about coming to the aid and defending folks who need the help so that they, through their hard work, have a chance to share in the reasonable profit so they can pay their bills, so that they can have strong communities. Washington has abandoned rural America, and we're here to say those days are over. When I was in Nebraska and when I was in Iowa, it was like I was in Vermont, talking to Vermont farmers. Because the challenges that the folks out there faced, even though their products were different than dairy, different than cheese, it was, as you know, beef, it was soybeans, they had no control over the price they were paid. And the irony of this is they've never had a better crop. They've never been more successful in using the skills they have to get out of the earth things that we need, but they've never had less control over what they would pay, what they were paid, and what they had to pay for the input cost. That is absolutely wrong. That is not inevitable. That is a function of a market without competition creating and grabbing the wealth that is created by the farmers. So how is it that that is going to be sustainable? But more importantly, when we are the United States Congress, how is it that we can stand by and not intervene on behalf of standing up for our farmers and for our rural communities? We haven't done that. This legislation says those days are over. We are here to put farmers first. We are here to put consumers first. We are here to put rural America first. This is a righteous cause that is absolutely essential to the well-being of the future of this country. Because ultimately what this is about is that in communities where you have people who are willing to take on the risk of farming, incredibly difficult, but where all of us understand and appreciate the value of farming, not just because of the food that it puts on our tables, but because of the community values, the intergenerational transfer of responsibility, of having individuals in a community who care deeply about where they live and who they live with, that should be front and center for our objectives, rather than permissive consolidation, where all of that effort and all of that labor is vacuumed up by the few, and where you get folks making $30 million who don't even know how to turn on a tractor. That is wrong. And what we're saying in this legislation is that we are committed to strengthening rural America, those agriculture communities that do so much for our country, and get so little in return. And we're doing it not just because we respect their work, not just because we want consumers who are showing up at the grocery store to get a fair price. We're doing it because we believe in communities. We believe in hard work. We believe that that should be rewarded and not punished. And we believe that those who create the wealth should get a reasonable share of the wealth that they created. This is absolutely vital to the well-being of our entire country. And I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this legislation.
All right. No, Ruben.
Oh, no. And now, the understated.
No, Ruben Gallego, not me.
Oh, Ruben.
Yeah. I'm now the
We had
cleanup.
to change order.
Well, he's pretty understated,
You
too.
say it 3 times, I pop in.
I now want to introduce the big-ass truck guy, Ruben Gallego from Arizona.
Troquita. Thank you, Brother Welch. Well, thank you for being this. Thank you for Leader Schumer putting this together, and for my colleagues here, Senator Booker, Senator Welch, for also leading on this issue, because this is extremely important. We are talking about the cost of everything in America, but the thing that you will hear all the time, especially if you go to the grocery store right now, is the price of beef and to some extent pork. For me, I have a young family of 3 kids. I've noticed the cost of food going up, whether it's when I'm trying to make burgers, whether it's time to make carne asada, the price is higher. Luckily, I am in a situation where I can actually afford that. But there's a lot of American families that a 15% increase just this year alone, in addition to the ones from the past, is just dire. And now you see a lot of families are trying to figure out how to still get that type of protein. And unlike what Mr. Kennedy says, not all of them want to eat liver. As a family growing up poor, I did eat a lot of liver. It is not that good, just to be honest. So let's not force people to do that. And why are we in this situation? And I'm sure Professor Welch explained the whole consolidation of the market. But it really is that. For many years there were so many meat packers, producers, and even lots that were localized would keep the price lower. Myself growing up in Chicago, I had a job working at a meatpacking factory, which was fed by local lots, which was, they came also from, that went to other producers and packers too. That place doesn't exist anymore. As a matter of fact, most of the places in Chicago that were involved in that have consolidated and or gone away, which means there's less and less competition. So who's actually making the money though, right? If you actually speak to the cattle ranchers, if you talk to whether it's the cattle ranchers or even the small ranchers, most of them are telling you that they only get 30% of what they used to get in the past. Right now, most of that profit has been pushed up to the producers up to 70%. So what that means is that the price is only being inflated for massive profits, and now we're getting into what I fear is a true death cycle when it comes to our local beef market. Because if you're not paying enough for that beef now, you're not going to encourage these cattlemen to actually start raising more heads of cattle. And if you don't do that, at some point, it's going to happen a further spiral. We're going to continue to have smaller and smaller cattle herds, which means the feedlots will be smaller, and you're going to have to import more, which also causes the same economic problem. And it's just going to cause more constraints and supply, and prices keep going up. This is not the way to do that. If we believe that protein is important to the American diet, we need to make sure that protein is also affordable to everybody in this country. The way this is going right now is that protein, at least high-grade protein, will only be affordable for those that can actually afford, that make the money to do that. So this bill is a great bill. I was so excited when I saw it. I wish I could say I wrote it. Did not, to be honest. These geniuses did, but I saw that because I really was excited about it, because it is something that is so important. It's something that I've thought about so much, and every day, because again I shop way too much for all my kids, it drives me nuts seeing what the prices are, and thinking about my mom who had to raise 4 kids on a secretary's salary, and I can't imagine what kind of stress she would be on trying to figure out how to buy that protein for those kids in this type of market. And it's only going to get worse if we don't make actions such as this right now. Beef will get more expensive, bacon will get more expensive, and once that happens and it becomes economically unattainable for our cattle ranchers to grow domestically more cattle,
it eventually becomes a piece of meat that is so expensive. So I'm glad we're doing this. I wish we would have come up with something like "Where's the beef?" Act, but the policy is good, and it's exactly what we need right now, and we need to move very, very fast on this. Thank you so much. And now, I'm introduced to you to the only man who is more worried about this than me, but also does not eat beef, but that's how much he cares about this. My good man, Senator Cory Booker.
So this is a great day, and it's a long day coming. I have been hoping for this for a long time. Many of you will know that the great Senator Jon Tester and I did videos where I used to let him literally slam me to the ground in order to try to bring ridiculousness, to bring attention to this crisis that's been going on for a generation in our country. So let me put it simple. All throughout our economy, massive corporate concentration is hurting people. From pharma to farms, we are seeing a concentration of corporate power in this country that is driving up prices, that is hurting workers. The economy is rigged. Now, when we're focusing on our challenges when it comes to farms, the Ag Bill is critical. And something I've seen that is so toxic and corrupt in Washington is how much corporate lobbyists and big corporations in the agricultural industry have a hold on Washington and are literally using their corrupt influence, their millions and millions of dollars of campaign contributions, to rig the system in favor of the big corporations. And if there's any example of this, it just happened last night when the House Agricultural Committee passed the Republicans' version of a new farm bill. What any new farm bill should do is address corporate concentration that is hurting farmers, that is hurting farm workers, and that is hurting consumers. It is literally strangling our food system, but Republicans last night in this bill, what do is they double down on corporate concentration to benefit big consolidated meatpackers and pesticide companies and lock in the status quo rather than dealing with the crisis that our family farmers are facing. And so that's why I'm proud to stand here today with my colleagues, proud here to stand here today with the fight that Jon Tester has been fighting for decades, and put forward legislation that would actually benefit family farmers and consumers. We have, over the last decade or so, lost thousands of our family farmers who've held those farms for generations. It worked for their parents, it worked for their grandparents, it worked for their great-grandparents. Because in the past, we stood up and fought against corporate concentration. But in order to now, in our generation, benefit all those people who are being screwed by the system, we have to actually enforce the same laws that our grandparents and great-grandparents did over 100 years ago. Congress passed the Packers and Stockyard Act. We have the power. But both political parties, they have recognized in the past that meatpacking companies got too big. Both political parties thought they had too much power in the past and that they were abusing their power in ways that was hurting all of Americans. But in these recent decades, we stopped enforcing our antitrust laws and allowed that handful of big companies to take control again of the marketplace. And as a result, we are now seeing a system that is so broken, most Americans are getting hurt. The system is so broken from family farmers. I have sat with family farmers and ranchers all over this country, Republicans and Democrats, and have heard their gut-wrenching stories from cattlemen who told me that they used to have dozens of different buyers, but now they only have a few or just one buyer. What that means is that there's no marketplace to set a fair price for our farmers and ranchers to get paid what they're owed. The system is so broken that now the wealth is being drained out of our rural places, drained out of family farmers and given to a few international companies. And it's broken for workers who are exposed every day to dangerous conditions in meatpacking plants as they use their power to increase line speed and do other things that's making that one of the most dangerous jobs in America. And the system is broken for consumers who are paying higher prices as a result of greedy corporations who rig the system and literally conspire to raise prices. Let me be specific about that. A handful of large multinational corporations such as Smithfield, Cargill, JBS, and Tyson, because of their size and extraordinary money, have undue influence over the marketplace, and because of Citizens United and allows them to pour money into this place, they have undue influence over public policy. And they've created a massive system that benefits almost exclusively themselves. The big meatpacking companies make billions of dollars in profits every year, and these same companies actually are being sued for engaging in price fixing. And those price fixing conspiracies, they're losing those suits. When they collude to inflate prices and people sue them for what they're charging, the companies have been paying tens of millions of dollars to settle these price fixing lawsuits, but they're treating this as just another cost of doing business because they have billions of dollars in profits, and what's a million here and a million there? Well, it's time for this system to change. It's not working. We need to create a food system that actually reflects our values, a food system that is fair for the people that produce the food. We tell stories. We have this image of the family farmer, the dignity of the people that actually produce the food we eat, yet we're screwing them in this economy that's allowing big multinational corporations to drive them out of business. I've been at this for years and years, for a long time, and I'm so grateful to be here on this day with Leader Schumer and with my colleagues that are finally leaning in even more to end this corrupt system. So I want to thank them. But everyone in America has to understand that there is this delusion of separation. They're dividing us against each other, and the people that are making out are these multinational corporations, many of them not even based in the United States of America. And they rig the rules for their own profit. They lie to consumers often and take beef from other nations and package it as a product of the United States of America. Everything they're doing is conspiring to hurt Americans, American farmers, American farm workers, and American consumers. When are we going to say enough is enough? At least in this area, at every family's kitchen table, we can say, we're done. We're fighting back. We're going to break up these big companies. We're going to enforce the laws that our grandparents and great-grandparents fought for. And we're going to create an economy that works for working people, works for farmers, and works for families. We can do that. We need to end the corruption. And we need to be in Washington showing people that we're fighting for Americans. Thank you.
We're going to hear from the many advocates who have been making the case for this. So we're going to first start with Joe Maxwell.
Freedom. Freedom.
As an American farmer, I thank Senator Schumer and the other senators. I thank them for the leadership in restoring freedom for America. And freedom is really what it's all about today, because that's what's on the line in America's food system. Whether you're the worker in the plant, the farmer in the field, or the consumer in the grocery store, this is your day to restore freedom. Freedom to stay on our farms and ranches and feed our neighbors. Freedom for small businesses on Main Street to survive and thrive. Freedom from working parents who work in those plants to get a fair wage, and those families, especially the mothers, to have the freedom to buy healthy, affordable food for their kids. That freedom is being stripped away as something we don't talk about enough in this country, let alone here in Washington, D.C., and that is corporate concentration. Monopoly oppression of the people of this country. The American story has always included a fight, not just against distant political power, but against economic power that rigs markets. One of the sparks of the Boston Tea Party was our then government, the English Parliament, granting the East India Company special monopoly power over colonial merchants. People saw a rigged market, a system which favored a few and denied choice to consumers. A system they said no to. And today we are saying no. Today, that fight starts here today. Today, monopoly power in our food system is driving this day, 63 farmers will be driven off their farms this day. It's hollowing out our rural communities. It's squeezing workers, and it's pushing food prices out of reach for too many families. All while a handful of corporations make excessive profit. And nowhere is this more visible than in meatpacking. Americans see a retail meat case with dozens of brands to choose from. But that is an illusion. A small number of giant companies control the processing and the brands. And they've gotten so big they don't even call themselves beef, pork, or chicken companies anymore. They call themselves protein companies. That matters because protein control undermines a very basic principle of economics. It used to be that if beef got too expensive, families could substitute pork or chicken, and competition would pull prices back in line. These companies can jack prices across the whole meat case, all at the same time. I'm not talking about our local or regional packers or the on-farm processing. I'm talking about these giant companies that dominate the meat market. People like Tyson, Cargill, and Brazil's JBS and National Beef. Almost 50% of the cattle market is controlled by Brazilian companies. We've seen how concentrated markets believe they take advantage of supply chain disruptions. Sometimes they even make their own supply chain disruptions to take advantage of it. When egg prices surged in 2022, consumers were told the story was shortage in avian flu. Yet production declined far less than the price increase, and profits soared. In a real market, new supply would have come in, prices would come down, and excessive margins would get competed away. That's not what happened, because competition wasn't allowed to do its job, because it doesn't even exist. When a Kansas packing plant fire temporarily reduced capacity, cattle producers, this is the power they're talking about there, cattle producers were paid less while consumers were charged more, creating a historic spread. And here's what really tells the story of corporate power and monopoly oppression. They slaughtered thousands of more cattle the 3 weeks following the fire than they did the 3 weeks before the fire. And yet they charged consumers record prices and charged farmers record loans, or paid farmers record. That's why Senator Schumer's legislation matters. This bill recognizes the truth farmers and families live every day. You can't have freedom without competition. It takes direct aim at excessive market power, monopoly oppression, including preventing dominant meat packers from operating across multiple lines of protein, and by using divestiture and structural operation to restore competitive market conditions. It creates real pathways for farmer cooperatives worker corps and small businesses to step into the market and grow. And let me say this plainly. I've said I'm a farmer, and I'm not here, nor are the farmers asking for special treatment. What we're asking for is a fair market. One where farmers can compete, workers are treated with dignity in those plants, and families can afford healthy food. Because when a handful of corporations control the essentials, everyone else pays. And they pocket the profit. Leader Schumer and the senators who have signed on to this bill today are beginning a march. A march against concentrated power, monopoly oppression that has gone unchecked for far too long. Let the history books say that when America's farmers were being driven off the land and America's people could not afford food, that our leaders did not stand with the monopoly. Let them say they stood for freedom, and they acted to restore it. Thank you all very much. I think Doa, Becky is next.
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning!
More than a century ago, Americans confronted a crisis that looked remarkably like the one we face today. Just 5 meatpackers exploited livestock growers. Congress had just passed our first antitrust law, the Sherman Act of 1890, and a Senate committee found the meatpackers were price fixing and allocating territories. This is a familiar history. Lots of senators have gone over this history because it's very important. The DOJ sued, and the conduct was supposed to stop. Undeterred, 3 of the 5 meatpackers actually merged. Threatened with a lawsuit, they agreed to dissolve. But Congress didn't actually sit on its hands. It wrote the FTC Act. An FTC report confirmed the meatpackers, in fact, were still at it. Congress responded with one of the most important ag competition laws ever written, the Packers and Stockers Act of 1921. The law recognized a very simple truth. When a handful of corporations control the choke points in our food system, the market stops working the way it should. It stops working for farmers, it stops working for workers, and eventually it stops working for regular people who need to feed their families. That principle has guided generations of American antitrust enforcement. As FDR warned, and I quote, "The liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than their democratic state itself." Oligopoly, after all, is its own form of government. His top antitrust enforcer over at the DOJ, a guy named Thurman Arnold, was even more to the point. He wondered whether the titans of industry will even participate in our form of government itself. That question is once again before us today. Over decades, the meatpacking industry has reconcentrated to levels that would make the robber barons blush. We didn't get here overnight. Like many American nightmares, economic nightmares anyway, this story started in the 1980s. Like so many massive corporations, they had the salve of efficiency rationales, divorced from statutes, and courts that read away load-bearing rules in antitrust and consumer law. The result? The meatpackers merged into bigger corporations that could coordinate more effectively and in ways that were harder to detect. They could exact more bargaining leverage over livestock sellers and command higher prices over retailers and restaurants. Eventually, they impose their own rules and taxes in the marketplace. They lobby for preferred subsidies and regulations. They capture agencies. This is the tyranny of the intermediary. I've spent my entire career practicing as an antitrust lawyer, including a decade at the DOJ's antitrust division. During the Biden administration, we made it a point to focus on reining in law-breaking and chaos in this industry. In February of 2021, Pilgrim's Pride pleaded guilty to price fixing and bid rigging for broiler chickens between 2012 and 2017. When I was acting head of the antitrust division, we filed a case against Cargill and several chicken processors for exchanging sensitive wage and benefit information for chicken process about slaughterhouse workers. We forced them to set aside $85 million for affected workers and banned their data consultant from the industry. And when they refused to comply with the court-ordered decree, we dragged them back into court. We brought the first ever Packers and Stockyards Act claim in the antitrust division's history to begin to dismantle the tournament system, which is deeply and fundamentally unfair to growers. We removed safe harbors for collusion that this administration appears intent on bringing back. We filed a case against Agristat, which alleged the protein processors used to facilitate and coordinate capacity and pricing information. That case is set to go to trial in 2 months. These cases illustrate a broader point. We put our faith in free markets and fair dealing, but markets can't deliver when they're hobbled by consolidation and coordination. That's what happened with the old combinations and trusts, and it's why Congress acted before. The Family Grocery and Farmer Relief Act continues in the tradition of American trust busting for open, vibrant markets. It focuses on structural relief and American supply chains instead of foreign ownership. This is not radical. It is deeply rooted in American history and the goals that animated the passage of our first antitrust and competition laws. I've worked for Republicans and Democrats. I've defended companies, and I've prosecuted them. The worst kept secret in the industry is everyone loves competition except the monopolists. That's why competition is at the heart of this bill. Competition that gives our fellow Americans multiple buyers for their cattle. Competition that gives grocers and restaurants multiple suppliers. Competition that frees us from the arbitrary coercion of monopolies. Competition that liberates us from democratically unaccountable oligopolies. I thank Senator Schumer for his leadership on this bill, and I think when these 11 senators are done, no longer will we have to open a history book for proof that Democrats dared to be great for America's farmers and ranchers. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and I am humbled and honored to be here with you today. My remarks are going to be just a tad bit different because the statistics and everything else have been discussed on music. But you're talking in front of, this person talking to you in front of you today is a kid who grew up in the 50s in Immokalee, Florida. That was a thriving community then. We had farmers, and I remember at 5 and 6 years old that I would go to the local Eileen's restaurant with my dad and all the farmers, and they'd get together and they would talk. And if you look at what's happened to Immokalee today, it's gone. And it's been hollowed out by exactly what we're talking about today. I was on my way to California to talk about labeling laws in retail, and I got this call. I said, I'm coming here instead. This is important. The farmers and ranchers that the American grass-fed people ranch, we represent every day. When I pick up the phone in the morning and I talk to them, and the fact that they're still doing this is an honor for me to talk to them every day. It's a testament to their fortitude, their ability to work in this environment, to hear the struggles that they have every day, to see all of you here to support what they're doing is just incredible to me. I can't say enough. I've got a few little things here, but at the last minute, when we talk about farmers and ranchers only having one buyer, and that's all they have, that's true. And when you go to the grocery store and everybody else is talking about the consumer, and you see a package of meat in the grocery store, I want to know where it's from. And Farm Action and American Grass-Fed got the Product USA petition in the last administration, and it's going to go into effect, and we're going to hold their feet to the fire on that one. We really are, until we get mandatory country labeling, I'm a little nervous, as you can tell, passed, we're gonna hold people's feet to the fire on mislabeling of meat in the marketplace. The American family farmers deserve to have their meat labeled, and we're gonna make sure that happens as much as we can. The other thing that comes up a lot in my talk is that we gotta stop calling it the farm bill. It's the food bill. And if the American consumer understood that what they're voting for and what their people are voting for is not for farms, it's for food. And if we can make that change in the way people think about what they're doing, I think it'll help a lot. It won't happen, but I'm gonna call it the food bill. The other thing too is, and I'm gonna cut these short because I wanna hear from the next speaker. We share a lot of past in history, is that I really appreciate the fact that you're now talking to us and not about us. Thank you. Michael Cade, sorry. I'm gonna introduce Michael Cade, who's gonna introduce the next one.
So why are beef prices so high? If you read the trade press, the industry will tell you, the meat packers will say, well, demand is high, herds are small. We're just an innocent victim like everybody else in this supply train. So I spent years at the Justice Department working for Doha on agricultural competitions. I know when a market's broke, and the cattle market is broke. And the meat processors are not innocent victims. The meat processors created this situation. And they're hiding behind that very problem. If you suppress prices long enough, herds shrink. And I need my glasses apparently. And suddenly, herds shrink and prices downstream rise. And eventually consumers pay more. Just take a look at what's happening today. What should have been the Packer response to record demand. In a normal market, people want to buy things, producers expand, because if they don't expand, somebody else will, and they'll eat their lunch. Instead, the Packers are closing plants. They are taking capacity out of the market. Now, if you're a competition person, you say, well, why is that occurring? Because the Packers want to send a message to the ranchers and the feedlots. Don't expand your herd. We're not even gonna have the capacity to process that. And so they maintain their ability not to compete by not demanding more cattle. But here's the worst part about it. Concentration breeds concentration. The concentration we've seen at the meat packer level over the last 40 years, it doesn't just stay there. They are squeezing the feedlots and pushing out the smaller and independent feedlots. And in turn, the bigger feedlots that survive are exerting that same pressure over ranchers. Between 2017 and 2022, on average, tens of thousands of ranchers exited the market. Tens of thousands. And once you break that industry, once you break that ecosystem, once that chain breaks, like Humpty Dumpty, nobody can put it back together again. And the symptoms are visible. Capacity discipline lowering cattle prices, imports undermining domestic producers, contracts favoring large feedlots over small ones. But the cause is the same. It's concentration and market power. Now, as Joe said, ranchers and feedlots don't want handouts. They don't fear risk. and they don't shy away from a hard but fair fight, where skill, initiative, and hard work determine who wins and who loses. But that's not what's occurring today. The problems of market power have been strangling a way of life that is the pride of America. Ranchers in rural communities should not have to wait any longer. Restore competition, and we all win. And thank you, and now I'm gonna turn it over to someone, the people who work as hard as farmers are the people who own restaurants. And so I'm really happy to turn it over to Amy Brandwine, who runs Centralino, which you should go to. It is an awesome restaurant.
Hello, Leader Schumer and all of my food industry friends. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Amy Brandwine, chef owner of Centralina and Piccolina da Centralina in Washington, D.C. I'm here not as an economist, but as someone whose bottom line, staff, and guests are directly shaped by the reality of food costs every single day. I'm here to represent myself and also the Independent Restaurant Coalition, which is a force of good for independent restaurants in Washington, D.C. and across the nation. This year, nearly 91% of restaurants reported food cost increases in 2025, and most saw these increases range from modest single digits to more than 10 or even 15% on key ingredients. Costs at independent restaurants have outpaced inflation over the last decade and are putting enormous pressure on business. The average margin for an independent restaurant is 4 to 6%, meaning every cost pressure forces difficult decisions. For independent operators like me, this dynamic creates a constant tension. Either we raise prices, risking traffic and consumer trust, which is really, really important, or we absorb these costs and watch our margins shrink dangerously. This year, we've seen the price of chicken breast increase by 30%. Beef has gone up 14%. Behind the scenes, the hanger steak, which used to cost us $9.58 to produce, between the protein, the spices, and the labor, which everything is increasing across the board, has jumped to $12.60 just to make the same recipe. And while that might not seem like that much, it sure does when I tell you that one of your favorite menu items has gone from $40 to $48. And at some point, it's really hard to explain to guests without a spreadsheet in hand. Cost pressures ripple through every decision that we make. I can no longer work with one of my favorite regional pork producers. Delicious, delicious, delicious pork that the vast majority of people will never get to try because of the current situation that we have at hand. Consolidation in the processing industry means that the grower must dramatically increase their price, which when reflected on the menu, you'll have to decide whether this is a restaurant that you want to come to just for a special occasion, or if you need an expense account. And those are the decisions that I don't want people to have to make. We're adjusting portion sizes, altering recipes, and asking staff to do more with less, not because we want to, because that's the economic reality we face. Many of my colleagues are having the same conversation in cities and towns across America. These are terrible choices. The bill that Leader Schumer is announcing today addresses one of these increasing costs, the cost of meat. The approach is welcome and needed to get one cost center under control for Centralina and so many other restaurants across the country. Getting back to reasonable sized meat operations and putting wholesale and retail customers and eaters ahead of massive corporate consolidation and foreign ownership is an important first step. As chefs and restaurant owners, we know every plate connects us to our ranchers, farmers, breweries, winemakers, and the many, many businesses that keep our kitchen running. It is a huge ecosystem. Independent restaurants employ more than 11 million people and generate tens of billions of dollars across that supply chain. I'm grateful, very grateful that Senator Schumer and his colleagues are listening to the challenges facing our industry and recognizing the role that independent restaurants play in our communities and in our economy. Thank you very much.
Hi, Hi everyone, I'm Albert Bedoya. Most recently I was at the FTC. Now I'm proud to be Senior Advisor at AELP. I'm going to close this out in 90 seconds. When you have one place to process your cattle instead of 3 or 4, it's often so far that your cattle die in the heat of the drive to that processing center. When you have one place to process your cattle instead of 3 or 4, when that place closes, as it does during COVID, you have to euthanize your cattle. You have to hire people to dig holes and put them in because you have nowhere else to put them. When you have one place to process your cattle, what they pay is what you get. When you have one meat processing plant in town, there's one place to work. So that processing plant can increase the line speeds to make you work so fast, so hard, that your hands stop working, your arms stop working. There's a group of workers in Greeley, Colorado at a JBS plant that alleges that their hands are literally stuck into hooks because of how hard they have to grab their equipment during the day. When we talk about breaking up regional meatpacking monopolies, we're talking about taking care of cattlemen, we're talking about taking care of ranchers, we're talking about taking care of workers, we're talking about taking care of consumers. So that's why this bill is so important. That's why Leader Schumer's support is so important. Senator Welch's support is so important. Senator Gallego's support is so important. And Senator Booker's support is so important. The American Economic Liberties Project is going to keep up this fight. I want to say thank you to the National Press Club. I want to say thank you to Ms. Malcolm, Chef Brandwine, Mr. Maxwell, and all the organizations that supported this bill and will see it forward. Thank you all for coming today. We hope you have a wonderful day, and let's hope this legislation is passed sooner rather than later. Thank you.